So you'll probably recognize this plant as Maidenhair Fern, or just one of the many Maidenhair Ferns. This is Adiantum raddianum, and radiatum doesn't mean anything special. It is named after the botanist that probably had discovered this plant. And I love Maidenhair Ferns. This is one of the first episodes that I did long time ago, showing how I grow my Maidenhair Ferns. And I often use hydrospikes, not with something this small, but in my larger vessels where I'm growing, or where I was growing Maidenhair Ferns, I would put hydrospikes. And these are spikes with a little bit of water and a little bit of terracotta and a top, and you use capillary action in order to be able to bring the water up in these plants, because if you've grown Maidenhair Ferns in your home, you will realize that they hate drying out. And I had pulled up a lot of my Maidenhair Ferns from the floor because when I got my pet chicken, Kippee, rest her soul, because she had passed, Maidenhair Ferns was one of the first things that she really gravitated towards. My calatheas and my Maidenhair Ferns were things that she really loved to eat. So I actually had to pull up all of my Maidenhair Ferns, and I started to put them in my green wall, which they kind of struggled a little bit in my green wall, because my green wall has a tendency to get wet and then dry out a lot, and that drying out period is not that great for Maidenhair Ferns. That being said, if you let your Maidenhair Fern dry out, it's not always that big of a deal because they have a really tough root system. So I've found if you have some leaves, like some of these leaves right here that are starting to get brown or drying back, just cut the stem back, and oftentimes you'll see new little fiddlehead fronds kind of poking up out of the matrix down here. I can't really see. Oh yeah, there's some new ones down here that are starting to come up, and fiddleheads are just like little names for like little baby ferns. They kind of come up and they look like little cobra heads. But now I can actually start bringing my Maidenhair Ferns down, towards my ground again. But I have to say that I actually had some of these growing away just a little bit off from my southwest facing window, which is not typically where I would say you could grow Maidenhair Ferns. But if you're giving it a lot of water and it's getting the water that it needs, I found that they don't really dry out, or they don't turn brown, and they don't crisp up, or they don't get chlorotic, even with some of that kind of intensity of light. But in general, these are plants that are growing in a little bit more lower light, or tolerant to a lower light condition, or medium light. And this plant I actually have growing. I have a few Maidenhair Ferns now that are growing in all different kind of lighting conditions. Some that are growing in my kitchen, some that are growing in a little bit further away from my southwest facing window, and some that are growing in my northeast facing light. But I really love the texture of these leaves. It's one of those plants that I think a lot of people really want to grow, but sometimes they actually can't keep up with the watering. What else can I say about this plant? I guess a lot of stuff. Like, in order to be able to propagate it, you could either divide it. You could also start with the spores, which is equivalent to like a fern's seeds, but that's really challenging, and we're often not set up for that and growing ferns from spores. This is native to the Argentinian area, so I don't think I actually said that. And as far as fertilizing goes, you could probably get away with like a bi-weekly or monthly basis using just a really balanced fertilizer like a 1-1-1 or a 10-10-10. Although if you're using that synthetic route like a 10-10-10, then you'll want to actually water that down. So if it says half a teaspoon per gallon, then you probably want to do like a 1/4 teaspoon per gallon from that level. But again, if you let this dry out, don't despair. If you have the space, then just cut it back, keep it moist, and then you'll start to see some of those fronds kind of pop up again. Otherwise, these plants are particularly good at growing in a little bit more like terrarium conditions. So if you have a small terrarium, or if you have a big jug or a big bottle, then you could actually plant something in there, and that will pretty much then take care of itself, I would have to say.